Hello everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of What Works podcast run by Edgecom Energy. I'm your host, Chris Brady, bringing you again our founder and CEO, Behdad Barami.
Hi everyone, Behdad here. Hey Chris, happy to be on another podcast with you.
Glad to have you. It's I think the interactions are a lot more prominent when it's the two of us running with it, so I think that people will be excited to see it. And today we're talking about energy transition and what that even means. Maybe we can go into a bit of the history of it and where it's headed, and then most importantly, what you can even do about that to kind of get yourself ready for it, if not already push towards the next direction. So I'd like to get right into it, Behdad. Thinking about energy transition, I mean, what does that even mean?
For me, energy transition really comes down to how we use energy and what we do with that energy and the approach that we have to decarbonization. So for decades and decades, we've considered energy as fossil fuels, oil and gas. When you tell most people you work in energy, that's probably their first assumption is that you work in oil and gas. Over the past 10 to 15 years, I think there's been a strong push towards renewables, towards batteries, towards decarbonization. And all of it stems from the fact that if we continue to just burn fossil fuels as the way that we heat our homes, power our industries, then the planet's going to be in a seriously bad shape. So that's where it stems from. It stems from the fact that we want to get off fossil fuels. How fast we do that and how we approach that, whether it's through cap and trade mechanisms, whether it's through carbon taxes, these are political hot topics in almost every jurisdiction in the world. But for me, really, what the energy transition means is it's a new way of doing things, a better way of doing things, and transitioning off of fossil fuels in the least painful way possible. And that's where things like energy efficiency, grid optimization, all of it really stems from the fact that we have to get off of fossil fuels. And it will affect every aspect, I think, of our lives, from the transportation to industrial production to how we heat our homes, how we power our grids. All of that is a part of this big wave, this massive change called the energy transition. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest opportunities in our lifetime. If we handle it in the right way and we incentivize the right structures, I think it's going to be a huge opportunity to get over the hump and to get to the other side of this net zero world, which I'm all for.
Yeah, and I think it's something people are really working towards. And looking at people as part of a society is they hate change. And we currently have such a big push on moving away from oil and gas, but it's all we've known for so long. And I think history is really telling, and a conversation starter that I've been using to kind of leverage what energy transition really means is, let's go back in history, right? Let's look at the Bronze Age. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't really use bronze tools anymore to make things, but metals are absolutely still a part of our society. It's important, right? So it's, yes, this was an important foundation towards building the next step, but there is a next step. And I think when we're living in the present, something that helps people understand that there's things we're working towards, we might not know what they are yet, but they will be better. And so putting that best foot forward, I think, kind of supports a lot of the fears that are around this energy transition and going green. Not to say that there is or isn't problems, but there is with everything. And the reality is, if we stay on oil and gas, we don't have a planet, which is the biggest problem there can be. And I guess kind of bridging that is each market has had its own way of approaching this energy transition and incentivizing manufacturers and people and to support the push forward. So I guess I'd love to hear what your favorite approach is that you've seen in any of the markets, and then maybe also talk a little bit about Ontario's approach.
Yeah, so I think right off the bat, the thing that makes the most sense is optimizing the energy resources that you already have and using less of that resource, right? So Ontario, I think, has done a tremendous job through the Save on Energy program, Industrial Accelerator, various programs through NRCan to incentivize energy efficiency. And that's always the starting point, right? So whether your power grid is coal or it's natural gas or it's nuclear, it just makes sense to have more energy efficient ways of doing things. So starting with the lighting, various retrofits, that all makes sense. And I think Ontario's done a tremendous job in incentivizing and bringing that to the forefront of the culture, right? So again, with the Save on Energy program, it's something that, most average people have somewhat heard of it through radio ads, bus ads, coupons at, Home Depot. So I think Ontario's done a really, really good job at that. We're also very lucky in Ontario in that, just by the nature of our grid and by turning off the coal plants, we started doing that, over a decade ago, right? So that was not very, it wasn't a political hot topic at that time, as much as maybe it would be now, right? So that happened and everyone was for it. Getting rid of local pollutants, nobody was really, having issues with it. We were also lucky that at that time the demand on the grid wasn't huge. So retiring those coal plants wasn't something that maybe if we tried to do that now, it would have been a political nightmare with the growing demand. But Ontario has been leading on that, and really I think it's an example for the world of the ideal type of grid, right? The ideal type of grid, in my opinion, should be a grid that is primarily nuclear for the base load, solar and batteries for some of it, hydro for some of it, and then anything that's left over that you really can't mitigate with solar and batteries, we're using gas. Now Ontario's going in the wrong path a little bit with more gas plants, but we're still, compared to many, many places in the world, we're a leading edge. And this is a massive opportunity for Ontario to make that a bigger selling proposition for expansion of industry in the province, right? But when it comes to different ways to decarbonize, it's a very political hot topic. I think what we had with cap and trade here in Ontario made a lot of sense. I think, capping those emissions targets makes a lot of sense. At the same time, you don't want to make life unaffordable for people, and you don't want to make certain segments of the population or certain industries be the bad guy, right? So we all have to treat it as we're all in this together, and how do we kind of structure it in a way that as we go through this transition, the people who are working in those industries or the businesses that are involved in those industries are not just expected to shut their doors tomorrow and everyone good luck, right? We can't have that kind of mentality. So I think incentivizing the right programs, incentivizing energy efficiency, putting a cap on the overall emissions, I think we've done a lot of good things in Ontario, and both the Conservatives and the Liberals I think have done tremendous in Ontario, and I think we're leading the world when it comes to energy policy.
On the topic of Ontario's grid, as well as maybe taking some steps in the wrong direction with natural gas, I think the ISO frankly is no stranger to trying and failing. Mm-hmm. And I think that may be a short-term fix while they figure out the longer-term answer, right? I mean, we have the global adjustment costs in place to support the R&D. We are sourcing batteries, et cetera, to kind of support what's needed. But also, again, we can't deny the demand that's growing and the weather changing around us to kind of compensate with that. Mm-hmm. But it's a good segue into the next question I have for you. There's market forces that play a huge impact on how fast and how aggressively we can push the market. There's the policy and politics side of things, as well as just kind of that cost trade. What do you think is the most impactful resource when it comes to pushing all of this forward?
I'm a firm believer in solar and batteries, right? I think we've just seen the price of batteries continuously drop. It just keeps beating its own record of how low the price can go. And I think, obviously there's a constraint at the end of, how cheaply can you mine the minerals and how cheaply can you manufacture a battery. But I think we've just constantly been surprising ourselves as these gigafactories get bigger and bigger. The cost of these batteries continues to go lower and lower. I think we're going to get to a point where, a few years payback for a behind the meter battery solution is in the horizon, right? And once we get to that point, it's just going to be a no-brainer. I think batteries and solar are going to be a huge part of it. There's a lot of other technologies that are coming up as well, right? So V2G is something that people have been talking about for a long time, getting that power that's stored in electric vehicles back into the grid. There's a lot of creativity, right? And as long as the right incentive structures are there, and I think this is one thing I learned dealing with the global adjustment, as long as the right incentive structures are there, and that's the government's job, right? The government's job is to just create the right atmosphere for then private industry to come in and solve a lot of those problems. And we saw that with global adjustment, right? So finding new ways of installing DERs, optimizing how you consume your HVAC, installing solar panels. All of these things are happening because of this really lucrative incentive structure. And I think as long as we continue with that, as long as we pull the right levers to just let private sector come in and innovate, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of innovation and a lot of interesting things happening in the space.
Yeah, so when the ISO and these governments, they decide to kind of take reins on it and leave the private sector out, we can see right away how it hurts. And I think a good example of that's like the clean energy credits. It's a very good push for solar and batteries and green resources, because a lot of even our customers here in Ontario are no longer getting contracts if they don't have a certain amount. But the other issue is they have no idea what these clean energy credits are or how to get them. And then you're getting somebody that's whole world is involved in manufacturing, and you're getting them into virtual power plants and like outsourcing generation, and that's confusing, right? So how do you think we can kind of bridge private sector into some of these existing programs to have a more in unison approach?
So first of all, you got to make these programs as simple as possible. So if a facility has the right staff, right, upskilling an energy manager or a sustainability manager to start taking into account new programs and new initiatives, that has a cost associated with it, right? So you want to make it as simple as possible, and you want to make it as streamlined as possible. Anytime a new scheme is thought of by a government, there are people who come and try to use that scheme as a new business opportunity, right? I think the best way to do it is to just make it simple, make it easy, make it transparent. And if you do that, then the facilities that want to do it themselves, they have the people, they can figure it out. The ones that want to hire a consultant can do it. There's going to be innovation around software solutions that are able to do that. So I think just you want to start with a simple approach, right? You want to start with transparency, less bureaucracy. These programs are required, right? The regulations are required. I wholeheartedly believe that we have to go down this path, but make it simpler, make it easier, right? Make it a no-brainer, so that when people want to participate, it's not this heavy undertaking and now, again, costing hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars to wrap your head around what this all means and how you're going to navigate it, right? So simplicity, again, there's a lot of tools, and I think the government is pushing in that direction, but it takes time. But I think that's one of the downfalls, I think, of Ontario. I think the bureaucracy still takes a long time. Things really could be streamlined. There's no reason why it shouldn't just be a quick, easy software portal that solves all these problems, right?
Yeah, and on the flip side, I'm thinking for the finance guys, the operation guys that are running these manufacturing plants. We've alluded to it, but getting into this shift, if we change this culture, how does this change operations and costs for a lot of these manufacturers?
Yeah, so that's, again, I think the days of just getting a bill and that's your energy data and just using that as your basis of making decisions and thinking of energy as a fixed cost, right? I think that's been the culture in most manufacturing for forever, right? So it's been, we use energy, we pay this bill, and that's the extent of energy management, is paying a bill, right? It is changing, it is shifting, it's come a long way in the past 5 or so years, but I still think there's a long way to go. I still think there's a lot of manufacturing where, in industry generally, it's not part of the core culture where energy is a flexible cost. Energy is a cost that I have control over. Everyone's always trying to find ways to reduce their HR costs. Everyone's trying to find a way to make their human resources more efficient and more competitive. Better procurement of materials, cheaper materials, better production equipment. If you talk about that, that's obviously a no-brainer. No manufacturing facility would, not be looking at that stuff. They're obviously considering all that, right? But when you talk about energy, even though it's usually the second or third line item, when it comes to their overall expenses, it's something that still to this day, it's, we use it and we pay for it, right? Now, as that price continues to go up, as Scope 2 emissions continue to grow in importance, that's going to be something that is slowly changing. I also think a big part of it is it's a generational gap, right? So when we talk to, and not always, but sometimes, right? When we talk to younger facility managers, operation managers, they right off the bat are, of course I need to be monitoring my energy consumption in real time. This is $1 million a year cost. Of course I have to be looking at that. I need a dashboard, right? So it's a no-brainer. Whereas some people who've been running things, the way that things have been working for years and years, it seems like a new undertaking and it seems like a heavy lift, right? So I think we're seeing that shift.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed on top of just the generational gap is that there's an industrial mindset as well in certain industries. Automotive, I think, is the easy one to pick on here, where it's over 100 years of doing the exact same thing, just with slightly newer materials, slightly newer processes, but nothing ever changes too much. It's always been a set it, forget it, profit. And I think the energy infrastructure is really going to force industries like that to think. Now, do you think that the policies advancing should be light on industries like that, or do you think that we should eventually get to a point where it's sink or swim for these companies?
Yeah, I think it's that S curve of technology evolution, and I think with EVs coming down the pipe, they're not going to have a choice, right? I think once consumers see something that's cheaper, better, faster, and that tidal wave comes, it's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle, right? So you talk about, a perfect example and a perfect analogy would be like Amazon, right? You click a button, you get the thing you want the next day, right? An EV, the way that I see EV is like I have an EV, right? The way that I see it is never had to do maintenance, never had to get an oil change. My brakes last the whole time I've had the car. The brakes have lasted, right? The batteries maybe reduced in life capacity maybe by around 3% in 4 years of ownership, right? So once more and more people, once the average person gets exposed to that and just gets used to that tidal wave is going to come. So these industries are going to have no choice but to evolve. And I think the auto industry is definitely one that is ripe for disruption. And you see companies trying to dabble in it, but I think it's going to be something that it's going to be a tidal wave of change coming down the pipe for sure.
Yeah, and in Ontario specifically, what do you believe are the leading incentives or leading policy pushes that are going to really support this transition?
So again, I mean, we just recently we had the revamping of the Save on Energy incentives. So that's billions and billions of dollars going towards energy efficiency, going towards solar panels. So new ways of producing power, distributed power, both for residential solar, for industrial solar. The incentives are very lucrative as well right now. So this just speaks to the government's belief that this is a cost-effective approach to add more energy to the grid, right? When the Liberals lost in Ontario and then Doug Ford and his government came in, the talk at the beginning was we're going to get rid of all these energy efficiency programs. EV rebates are gone. Like, just forget about all this stuff. Let's, drill, baby, drill, right? That was kind of the mentality. But once they came in and they did real thorough financial analysis, every kilowatt hour that you save is much cheaper than generating a new kilowatt hour. So putting these incentives in place makes a lot of sense. Again, whether it's for solar, whether it's for energy efficiency, and I think that Save on Energy program is going to spur a lot of activity. There's also the ISO procurement happening, on the battery side, on front of the meter. So that's going to be really interesting as well to see how that shapes up and where that price goes. Finally, market renewal, right? So market renewal program has been something the ISO has been working on. I think it's been like 5 or 6 years that they've been talking about it, but May of this year, that's going to be really going into market, and it's going to create whole new opportunities for energy retail and hedging structures and day ahead markets. So there's going to be, and we have a webinar coming up where we're going to get into detail on that. But I think, again, Ontario is doing a tremendous job. We're blessed with the grid that we have, but I think we're also managing it very well.
Yeah, and I think a joy of Ontario specifically that a lot of places, especially thinking in certain states that they don't have the luxury of, we have a lot of flat land that we can build on top of and we can put down. And it's interesting, I've been to a few site visits recently in like Toronto area, and they can't have solar on the roof because the planes are coming in and they can't be reflective because of all that protocol. They have no property because everything is developments around them, and they're like, well, we don't have space for a battery, we can't put solar. How are we ever going to get to this sustainable point? But the joy is the ISO knows that. We're working on interconnecting the grid very thoroughly so that everybody can rely on each other.
Yeah.
And you may not have space, but there's a lot of space up in Timmins, Ontario, right? Where if we have generation, we have assets, it's like we can trade off. And I think that's a real big advantage that Canada as a whole has, that nowhere else in the world can really benefit from. So I guess with it all being said, where do you see Ontario's grid in 5 years?
That's a really tough question. So I think, again, with there's definitely going to be a lot more batteries on the grid. There's definitely going to be a lot more, I foresee a lot more behind the meter batteries going in as well, not just for cost saving, but also for resiliency, right? So we've seen more and more clients request, UPS tied batteries where they'll be able to use the energy for resiliency, right? And I think a big part of these new technologies, whether it's the software or there's many auxiliary benefits, right? So there's the sustainability aspect, but separate from sustainability, you're looking at cost savings. Separate from cost savings, you're looking at resiliency, right? And that's the same thing as when you go and you upgrade your lighting to LEDs or you get a new HVAC. It's not just the cost savings that makes you do that, right? It's having a new innovative piece of technology that helps, increase comfort, increase visibility, right? So there's always auxiliary benefits, and I think maybe we have to do a better job as an industry explaining those benefits to the people that are going to be interacting with these solutions. So I think Ontario is going to be, again, continuing to lead, and I've been saying this for years and years. The Ontario model is going to be rolled out in other places because we had a big uptake of solar panels through the feed-in tariff programs, because we had those coal plant retirements. Ontario's grid and the dynamics behind that grid with peak programs and demand response programs, those are going to be rolled out worldwide. This problem of the duck curve is not going to go away with just batteries. So things like peak programs, I think, are going to continue to be important. Things like demand response programs are going to continue to be important, and Ontario has been leading on this, Ontario, California, but we're seeing, the NYISO has had some very, very lucrative demand response programs, PJM, so with the capacity prices going through the roof. So I think there's going to be a lot of incentivization for grid flexibility and demand flexibility, and Ontario's been leading that, and I expect us to continue to do so.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that incentives is the #1 push through for, especially in the world of manufacturing, to get change. Recently I was on a site visit and the customer had a motor that had been consistently running for like the past 10 years basically, and the whole justification for it was that this is really expensive to replace and it's been around since the 60s. And if we turn it off, we don't know that it's turning back on again, so count our blessings.
Yeah.
But if there's an incentive, you get a brand new motor for 40% of the price, well now it becomes a no-brainer, right? So incentivizing it and then also having a reason to do it. You're right, it is. On top of the fact it's a nice new piece of technology, there's a sensible reason to do it, right? And a lot of manufacturing operates on the, okay, I need to save now, not think about tomorrow. So giving them a way to do both in a way that benefits everybody is going to be that leading way.
Well, it's also important that that's not their business, right?
Yeah.
It's just the most important thing. Like that's why you need that push, right? Every manufacturing facility, the main business is produce what we're supposed to produce, right? Whether it's a greenhouse or auto parts, that's the job of everybody who's there, essentially, right? So these incentives make that a no-brainer for sure. Also, the support in education and all those kinds of things, through Save On Energy with the Certified Energy Manager funding and the Strategic Energy Manager program. So getting that hand-holding that a lot of these facilities need, I think providing that hand-holding and providing the resources, the tools, the knowledge. And the other thing is what you see in a lot of manufacturing plants is continuity in processes, right? So you might have an energy champion who has wrapped his or her head around, the pricing structures, the bills, demand response, everything. And then once that person leaves, then they're starting back at ground one where there's a procurement manager who has really no idea how to control these bills. So planning continuity, and I think the Strategic Energy Manager program is a big part of that, but having those right structures and the right training throughout the organization, so it's not counting on just one person, I think that's an important thing for manufacturing plants for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the biggest gripes I'd say with some of the funding that comes out is it requires a lot of documentation. It's funny you say that. The documentation isn't to prove to the ISO or Save On Energy that the effort's being done. It's that they don't want it to get lost and forgotten as soon as it's all wrapped up, said and done. And forcing the document means that they have something to carry on and pass through the life cycle of that company, right? And I think what you're alluding to just perfectly shows how private sector like EdgeCom can come in and support the transition. But I think outside of subject matter expertise, where else do you see private sector kind of taking the reins on supporting this?
Well, I think there's been a lot of investment in new EV facilities here in Ontario. So I think the government, again, has done a good job of attracting that investment. I think we can be a clean energy hub, and I think we have been, and I think we can continue to do that. I think one place where private sector in Ontario specifically has been lacking is exporting some of these solutions, right? So getting some of these solutions to new markets, new grids, new jurisdictions. I know that the rest of the world is going to be following Ontario's lead when it comes to kind of how the grid looks and how the programs evolve. But I think we need to do a better job of getting that to the rest of the world as well, getting that knowledge to the rest of the world, getting that capability, getting that technology to the rest of the world so that they can benefit from these clean solutions as well.
Yeah, and I think starting to wrap it up here, there's clearly no concise definition of energy transition. It's just the future. Much like we went through Bronze Age, Stone Age, etc. It's the next step. Industry 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, whatever you want to call it. It's getting to the point where we can be more optimized. And there's pushes to support that in the way that governments and manufacturers and citizens alike think is best. And I agree completely that private sector is going to be a big push in helping that succeed. Do you have any other comments, anything you'd like to say on the matter while we're addressing energy transition in general?
I think it's just a part of human nature, right? Like we're going to continue to do more with less, right? And just get more efficient, right? And this is the natural evolution of what humans are, right? We're just continuing, the resources that we take, we make them more efficient, more attractive, we make cars faster, we make cars better, we make them more efficient. That's just what humans are meant to be doing, right? And this energy transition is just the next step of that, right? Taking a resource that we know is eventually going to run out, right? Whether it's in 5 generations or 20 generations, we know that this resource is going to run out when we have a limitless resource out in the sky, right? So everything that we do is going to change. And again, we just have to do it in a way that it's going to cause the least pain, create the most innovation and the most fun solutions that we possibly can, the best solutions that we possibly can. And at the end of the day, we don't want to make any industry be evil, right? The oil and gas industry brought 3 billion people out of poverty, right? Within the last 2 to 3 generations, 3 billion people that would have been in poverty came out of it because of oil and gas. So it's good that we're at the point that we are, but now we need to evolve. So working with those stakeholders, and EdgeCom is doing that right now. We have partnerships in place and we have solutions in place to make some of those facilities more efficient, right? They are also trying to evolve their business models and wrap their head around it. So again, it's how do we work together to get, to this next step in what humanity is, and energy is one of the biggest drivers in every part of our lives, right? And it's always been so for generations and generations. So I think energy transition is just the next natural evolution of humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for joining me today and going over it. It's a tough topic, but if you're an energy manager or involved in manufacturing, industrial, and you're watching and you're confused, it's okay. There's plenty of resources coming. There's plenty of private sector that are willing to help and support on that journey. And we're always putting out resources on our website as well to give insights where and when we can. Thank you, Behdad, for joining me today.
Thanks, Chris.
If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to follow, subscribe, like, comment any questions or thoughts or any follow-ups you'd like to see in future episodes. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.